Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. This is a new presentation from www.central-mosque.com in the Humble Heart YouTube channel. The topic of the presentation is Maulana Saad, Divider or Uniter. Before I turn to my topic, let me just set a few ground rules. There are a number of people, whenever a discussion happens about Tablighi Jamaat, jump in with both feet talking about weak hadith and this work is bid'ah and this and that. This specific presentation is directed towards those who are involved in Tablighi Jamaat or who have love for Tablighi Jamaat, who have admiration for Tablighi Jamaat, who appreciate those who spend their time, their money and effort for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This presentation is not for you if you're part of Weak Hadith and Bid'ah Brigade. I will enclose a number of articles that I wrote years ago on this topic. Please feel free to read it. At the bottom of the article is the email of the website. Email me and we'll discuss that. If you put comments in this presentation about weak and bid'ah and this and that, I will simply delete it. Buzz off. I have no interest in listening to you in terms of this particular presentation. For those who don't have time to decipher those detailed articles, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, who is one of the foremost scholars of hadith in this Muslim ummah, who compiled Sahih Bukhari, also authored a book called Al-Adab al-Mufrad, and Adab al-Mufrad, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, includes weak narrations. So it has always been established in this ummah that the writing narration of weak narrations, not fabricated, weak narrations, is permitted in matters of virtues. Example is the book of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, Al-Adab al-Mufrad. Moving on to group number 2. These are the groups of people who simply say my sheikh, my teacher is right. Let me start out with an anecdote. Years ago I had a friend of mine and he was involved with the Madkhali strand of Salafism, and he was involved with the sheikh, and he told me that, you know, this sheikh in London, he had a small apartment and he used to do his lesson there, and 10 or 12 of them used to gather, and he goes, we literally believed that, you know, the guidance of Allah shines upon this apartment, i.e. whatever my sheikh, my Madkhali Salafi sheikh says is correct. The whole of London, the whole of the world is incorrect. He goes, we used to take some of these arguments of the sheikh to the university, and these arguments were thoroughly destroyed, debunked from the Quran and the Sunnah from other people, destroyed, utterly destroyed, until we had no answer. And yet we continued to follow our sheikh. We continued to follow because we thought he was on guidance and everybody else was on misguidance, right? So there is a strand in the Muslim ummah, unfortunately, who think that basically truth lies with their sheikh, with their teacher. This is not true and never been true. The truth lies in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in the compendium, in the guidance of the ulama. So on this issue of Maulana Saad, we have evidence from a large body of Muslim scholars, a large body of Islamic institutions, and if somebody chooses to ignore that and continues to follow some advice of their sheikh, thinking my sheikh knows about this topic more than, let's say, you know, Darul Uloom Karachi or Darul Uloom Deoband or anything like that, then be prepared to answer for your folly on the day of judgment. And I tell a lot of young brothers, WhatsApp me on different topics, and I said, when Dajjal appears, and astaghfirullah, I am not comparing Maulana Saad to Dajjal. That is not the case. I'm giving you an example that when Dajjal appears, you will need to use your judgment, because a large number of Muslims unfortunately will fall into error and will follow Dajjal. So what are you going to do? You're going to follow your sheikh and your teacher because he makes an error in judgment and follows Dajjal and so on and so forth. I will leave it at that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question you on the day of judgment about decisions that you make. So if the truth becomes manifest upon you that about Maulana Saad, and once again, I'm not comparing Maulana Saad to Dajjal or liar or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm giving you an analogy. If the truth becomes manifest upon you and you continue to say, I'm going to follow my sheikh, my teacher, then your issue is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. Let's proceed with my presentation. There is an error in the Muslim ummah that when we discuss issues, we actually get bogged down into the weeds, into the low level details. We forget how an issue got to be where it is. So there's been many examples in the Islamic history where certain institutions or dawla or a state or certain territory was taken over by oppression through a coup or military takeover or through a political takeover. The opposition was subdued, and then this people in power, they enforce their will on, and then what the ummah does is gets bogged down and begins to discuss issues of secondary importance, right? Not how this power got to where it is. So they begin to discuss, okay, is this opinion correct, or is that opinion correct, is this writing correct, or is that writing correct, and so on and so forth. This is a problem. Let me give you two very quick examples. In Egypt, we had a democratically elected president of Egypt. His name was Hafid Muhammad Morsi, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was sympathetic to the Palestinians and the cause of Palestine. This person from Egyptian army, General Muhammad Sisi, he has now promoted himself to be Field Marshal Abdul Fattah Sisi, not only usurped power unjustly and in an oppressive manner from Muhammad Morsi, he was imprisoned and then he was later put to death. Today, over a decade later, if you look at the Egyptian media, or you look at the Egyptian scholars, or if you look at the Egyptian Islamic institutions, they are discussing issues of Sisi's government about certain economic reform or judicial reform and so on and so forth, and nobody is discussing that this Sisi, overthrew a democratically elected ruler of Egypt. So we are discussing petty issues instead of actually discussing how we got here, that his entire rule is based on oppression. When we look at Pakistan, when the US invaded Afghanistan and the war on terror started, there was this person, Parvez Musharraf, who was the military dictator of Pakistan. He leased Pakistani military bases. He allowed the United States to use Pakistani airspace to bomb civilians in Afghanistan. The Pakistani military was complicit in selling its own citizens to America for dollars, including our sister Afia Siddiqui. And everybody knows that. He usurped power in a military coup. There was a single politician who stood steadfastly against the US war on terror, stood steadfastly against the US drone strikes in Afghanistan and also in areas of Pakistan. His name was Imran Khan. Over a decade later, Imran Khan came to power in Pakistan in a democratically in a democratic election. He stood up, and here you see the picture. He stood up in United Nations. He talked about Islamophobia. He talked about various issues. He was overthrown by another Pakistani military general called Bajwa. That he retired. We now have another military general called Asim Munir. He's supposedly a Hafiz of Quran. He's also promoted himself to be Field Marshal. Imran Khan, his wife, and many thousands languish in jails in Pakistan. There's total crackdown on any human rights, any voicing of opinions, and the media in Pakistan, the scholars in Pakistan, the institutions in Pakistan, just like Egypt, are discussing specific reforms instead of this brutal legacy of military dictatorship which has driven Pakistan over the past 70 years, and specifically the actions of this man who has put Imran Khan and his wife in jail. The point I'm trying to say is the ummah gets bogged down into weeds in discussing opinions instead of looking at the big picture. So let's now turn to our topic of Maulana Saad. I had to set the scene to actually get you to what I want to talk about. Maulana Saad was born on the 10th of May 1965. At the age of 29, he was appointed to the Shura of Tablighi Jamaat. Maulana Saad never ever completed his Dars-e-Nizami. So in the Indian Pakistani Deobandi system, the curriculum that you completed at Darul Uloom is called Dars-e-Nizami. Maulana Saad was studying at Madrasa Kashif al-Ulum until the age of 29, until he was appointed to the Shura. He never completed his studies. Now, when I talk about this topic to some people, they raise two objections. They say, you don't have to be a Maulana to be the Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. That's true. That's not what I'm saying. I am simply putting this information out there that Maulana Saad never completed Dars-e-Nizami. He is not a Maulana in terms of completing his certificate. Maulana Saad, until the age of 29 years old, I will continue to address him as Maulana out of respect, but I wanted to put that out there that he has no qualification to be a Maulana. Until the age of 29, when he was appointed to the Shura, Maulana Saad was not a Tablighi. He had not spent any significant time, in fact, at all, in the Tablighi Jamaat. And those are the two facts. You can take that to the bank. The description field is open. Please go ahead and refute that. The issues that are related to Maulana Saad started way before Maulana Saad, and let me give you a little bit of historical background as to how these issues started. This work of Tablighi Jamaat was revived by Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala, hence he was the first de facto Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. He was guided by Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala, famously known as Shaykh al-Hadith rahimahullah ta'ala. In the Deobandi circles, he is known by his title, Shaykh al-Hadith, Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala. Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala passes away in 1944. And his son Maulana Yusuf, who was established scholar rahimahullah ta'ala, becomes the Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala on various occasions told the people around him, and specifically his son Maulana Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, to continue to work under the guidance of Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala, and Maulana Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala did, and other people of Tablighi Jamaat, the participants and the scholars, continued to seek guidance from Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala. What happened in 1965 is Maulana Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala was in Pakistan and arrived in an ijtima, and he passes away. So this was a sudden and tragic passing away, and there was a dispute after his passing away and his burial as to who will become the third Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. Maulana Yusuf had his son Maulana Harun, who was around 35 years of age at the time of his passing away, roughly 30, yeah, something like that. And there was an assumption that because Maulana Yusuf became the Amir after Maulana Ilyas, Maulana Harun should become Amir after his dad, his father, passed away. Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala and the Shura began to deliberate on this matter, and Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala was of the opinion that Maulana Inamul Hasan should become the third Amir, and Maulana Inamul Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala was appointed as the third Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. This was a massive dispute in the middle of 1960s. To the point where many scholars and many people who were loyal to the family of Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala, or the personality of Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala, instead of the work of Tabligh, broke away from this work because of Maulana Inamul Hasan being appointed as an Amir, and the key figure behind it, as I'm saying, was Maulana Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala. Maulana Harun passes away in 1973 after illness. He was in the hospital for a few weeks, and when Maulana Harun passes away, his wife says that people who conspired to take away the station of being the Amir of Tablighi Jamaat from her husband did black magic and he was poisoned. There was no such thing. You know, Maulana Harun, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him and give him Jannatul Firdaus, passed away out of illness, but there's no evidence that there was black magic or anything like that. So this, and what happens is there was a certain fraction. So let me take you a step back. When Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala started this work of Tablighi Jamaat, he worked on people around the old parts of Indian capital of Delhi today called Mewat. These people were called Mewatis because they lived in the area. There was a certain group of Mewatis who were personally loyal to this family of Maulana Ilyas, personally loyal to Maulana Yusuf, personally loyal to this particular strand of the family, okay, and they also assisted Maulana Harun's wife in spreading these rumors that he was poisoned or black magic was done on him, and so on and so forth. Maulana Saad was born in 1965. So as he was growing up in his household, he knew about these rumors, he knew about this fraction of Mewat, and this fraction of Mewatis who were personally loyal to the family of Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala always favored Maulana Saad. Maulana Saad rahimahullah ta'ala grew up to be a golden boy. because he was from the golden family of Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala. I'm setting the scene that you need to understand the historical background of where this conflict started. It's important for you to understand. Maulana Saad was always treated as a child, as a young adult, as a teenager, as the golden boy, because he carried the genes of Maulana Harun, Maulana Yusuf, and Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala. Maulana Saad, as a result of what is happening around him as he grew up, he always resented two personalities. He resented Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala because he felt that this was the key person who usurped the office of the Amir of Tablighi Jamaat from his father. So continuously before Maulana Saad became part of the Shura in the 90s, he continuously used to say that इस दावती काम के दो दुश्मन हैं, एक शेख के उन्होंने मेरे दादा की गद्दी मौलाना इनाम को दे दी और दूसरे दुश्मन मौलवी इनाम है कि उन्होंने इस काम को एक तहरीक बना दिया. So as I'm saying, speak to the old workers who were around in the 1990s. Speak to the people who are connected with Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala, either through his academic work or through his work of tasawwuf, and they will tell you that Maulana Saad, before he was anybody, he continues to repeat that this work of da'wah has two enemies. One is Maulana, he used to say Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala, who took the seat of my grandfather away from my father and gave it to Maulana Inam, and then obviously Maulana Inam, the third Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. These were his targets way before anything started, and this is on record, and on record to such an extent there were dozens of letters sent to Nizamuddin Markaz in India, the head of Tablighi Jamaat, to silence Maulana Saad, because he used to continuously say that before he even became part of the Shura. The second target obviously is Maulana Inamul Hasan, the third Amir of Maulana's of Tablighi Jamaat. Now, as I said, this issue started in the 60s. Maulana Saad didn't start this. He simply latched onto it, or he became aware of it, whatever the case may be. The fraction that was personally loyal to Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala targeted Maulana Inamul Hasan to such an extent that he, during the lifetime of Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala, wrote to him that he wants to leave India and he wants to migrate to Medina to do the work of Tabligh. Okay, because he was dejected, it affected him, he was a human being. Those who have not had a chance to ever meet the third Amir Maulana Inamul Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala, Hazratji rahimahullah ta'ala was a very humble, down-to-earth human being. He avoided limelight. He was more interested in making du'as to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing acts of worship. He was not interested in being in the limelight or being a political figure or answering people's refutations or anything like that. He was a very, very humble person. So a person of that disposition, he was particularly affected by the vitriol and the hatred towards him, because people thought that Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala, let me take you back to this chart, took away the chance of Maulana Harun to be the Amir, made Maulana Inamul Hasan to be Amir. So this, I'm going out of my way to make you understand that this issue existed before Maulana Saad. Now what happens? The third Amir of Tablighi Jamaat, Hazratji Maulana Inamul Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala, he's getting old. So on June 14, 1993, he appoints 10-member Shura to run the affairs of Tablighi Jamaat. This is roughly about 2 years before his passing away. And all of the 9 of the 10 members of this Shura are old workers of the Tablighi Jamaat, have a lot of experience, but a 29-year-old Maulana Saad is included in this Shura. Okay. So here you have the right to ask the question, how come, right? How come, I have previously said to you that Maulana Saad never graduated as a Maulana, never completed his course. He was not a Tablighi. He didn't spend a lot of time in Tabligh. So how come? Because there was a very powerful fraction of Maywatis, people who were particularly loyal to the family of Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala and his progeny. So to appease that factor, now, you have to understand, Hazratji Maulana Inamul Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala was a very humble person. He was not a politically motivated person. He was not, did not seek the limelight. So he, so the Shura decided to include this 29-year-old Maulana Saad to appease this fraction, and this fraction has always existed in Tablighi Jamaat. Okay. Then in 1995, what happens is this fraction, 1995 is the first ijtima after the passing away of the third Amir, Maulana Inamul Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala, and this Maiwati fraction insisted that Maulana Saad lead the ijtima. So there's a 10% shura, but they're insisting that this 29, or at that time 31-year-old Maulana Saad lead the shura. So once again, because of personal loyalty to a family. And from 1995 onwards, after the passing away of Hazratji Maulana Inamul Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala, things just simply go downhill. In 1996, Maulana Saad takes over the Markaz treasury. So he's the youngest person of the Shura. He's not a Maulana. He doesn't have a lot of experience in Tabligh, but he continues to expand his and exceed his authority. So he takes over the Nizamuddin Markaz treasury. Before this treasury was an informal thing. It wasn't really a particular, established, treasury or anything like that. But he takes over the reins because he can now control what gets spent and how, and so on and so forth. There was a room in Nizamuddin Markaz which was occupied previously by Maulana Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, the second Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. Maulana Saad says, I want to study his old manuscripts and stuff like that, and he takes over this room permanently. This room was used for Shura and so on and so forth, but he takes over this. So he takes over the treasury. Next, he takes over the room of Maulana Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, and then Maulana Zubair, who was one of the senior members of the Shura, he was forced to vacate his room. Maulana Saad says, he has to move his family in. He didn't move his family specifically in this location, but Maulana Zubair is forced to move in the vicinity in the location where him and his family lived. Then things come to a head in 2014. Maulana Zubair rahimahullah ta'ala was a senior Sheikh and well admired in the Tablighi Jamaat. He passes away in 2014. There's Bhopal Ijtima going on at a place in India called Bhopal. Maulana Zubair's son is Maulana Zuhair, again a very humble, down to earth, and people wanted to shake it. It's a custom or tradition in Tablighi Jamaat that at the end of Tablighi Jamaat, they make dua and then they shake hands of the scholars, and people wanted to shake the hands of Maulana Zuhair, who is the son of Maulana Zubair. Okay, but Maulana Saad, threw a tantrum, and he actually threw a big ruckus in the middle of the Ijtima, and so as a result, Maulana Zuhair was sidelined. The second thing Maulana Saad started is he used to tell people that for people to take bay'ah upon Maulana Ilyas, the first Amir of Tablighi Jamaat who passed away in 1944, and he says, take bay'ah to Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala at the hands of Saad. So so this is something that he started to be saying, people, this has never happened in Tablighi Jamaat. Like the previous Amirs didn't used to say take the bay'ah of Maulana Ilyas who passed away in 1944. Maulana Saad started this. Okay, and then around 2015 was a first mob attack on Nizamuddin Markaz. So this mob attacked Nizamuddin Markaz, trying to look for those who oppose Maulana Saad, but this attack was failed. However, there were a few injuries and so on and so forth. Maulana Saad continues to do his thing, and he changed the Fazail Amal course to Muntakhab Hadith. I'm going to talk about this in a second. Then the Tablighi Jamaat Markaz for the first time was closed for almost a month from November 17th to 2015 because Maulana Saad said there were some things going on that he didn't approve, so he basically shut down the Markaz. The only people that were allowed to stay there were foreigners who had visited the Tablighi Jamaat. The mob violence on the Tablighi Markaz continued, and on June 19, 2019, 150 people stormed the masjid during Ramadan. 14 were injured. There are numerous testimonies from scholars and old workers about this mob violence and how it was conducted, and so on and so forth. So things are getting very serious. Maulana Saad has taken over Tablighi Jamaat at this time. There were elders from Saudi Arabia. They decided to intervene and they decided to speak to Maulana Saad. So they spoke to Maulana Saad during and it was promised that they will have a conversation. So they actually decided to travel to India, although they were told that this is dangerous and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, they traveled to India and they tried to speak to Maulana Saad. They were shouted down at, and then while they were in Delhi, staying and waiting to speak to Maulana Saad, police raided the hotel and treated them as terrorists, confiscated their passports. They were later released and so on and so forth. So this conversation never happened. They actually don't mention these kind of incidents in their letters, but that's what physically happened. I will put links in the description where you can read about all of this stuff. This violence at the Tablighi Jamaat in 2016, which I talked about in the beginning, was widely covered in the Indian media because it was highly unusual. Tablighi Jamaat is not associated with violence and so on and so forth. All of this was happening as a behest of Maulana Saad. This violence, as you can see, this Hafiz Saab is injured, beaten up, and he's staying in a hospital. Now, you can say, okay, all of this violence is happening. Why are you saying this has to do with Maulana Saad? Because there are multiple testimonies that this happened at the behest of Maulana Saad, of cleansing the Nizamuddin Markaz from people that don't agree with him. A lot of this material is very well known, but there's a brother who's put together a website and he actually mentions testimony of people and so on in a lot of details. I will put that in the description for you to read. One of the things Maulana Saad has done is Tablighi Jamaat has always followed a particular curriculum called Fazail Amal. Earlier, this book was called Tablighi Nisab, but doesn't matter. Most people today know it as Fazail Amal. Maulana Saad has changed this to a book called Muntakhib Hadith, saying that this was compiled by Maulana Yusuf Kandhlawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Let me put this to you. There is no evidence that this book was compiled by Maulana Yusuf Kandhlawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Now, I did not know that. There are articles on my website, and there's actually this book is posted on my website. I did not know at that time because everybody took this at face value that this was compiled by Maulana Yusuf, the second Amir of Tablighi Jamaat. There's zero evidence, there's no manuscript, there's no mention of this book in any of the letters of Maulana Yusuf, rahimahullah ta'ala, etc. So Maulana Saad has decided to change that. Why? Because, once again, as I mentioned to you, Fazail Amal, this was written by Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria, rahimahullah ta'ala, and he always had a particular beef against Shaykh al-Hadith Maulana Zakaria, rahimahullah ta'ala, so he changed the book to his grandfather's book, supposedly Maulana Yusuf Kandhlawi. This book is not written by him. Actually, there's no evidence. The description section is open. Please feel free to provide the evidence that this is a compilation of Maulana Yusuf, rahimahullah ta'ala. Okay, now we get to the issue about what I've done is I've set the scene how Maulana Saad, rahimahullah ta'ala, over years encroached and took over this work of Tablighi Jamaat, took over and exiled the senior scholars who had spent a lifetime in the Nizamuddin Markaz to other parts, and there are now fatwas against Maulana Saad, and they continue. I'm recording this in July 2025. There's fatwas from Darul Uloom Karachi, from Darul Uloom Deoband, from scholars of Assam, from scholars in Bangladesh, and so on, and scholars of South Africa, and so on. And you will see that in the link of the website of the brother who maintains the Tablighi Jamaat website. You'll see some of those. So what I'm trying to say here is there's clear evidence of Maulana Saad expanding his authority, taking over the Nizamuddin Markaz, creating a split in the work of Tablighi Jamaat, which is now evident in most cities of the world. You have some people who back Maulana Saad and some people who don't back Maulana Saad, who back the World Shura, as it's called, and we're going to talk about this in a second. And there are all of these ulama. Now, if all of these scholars are saying, have some reservations about Maulana Saad, and your Sheikh, your Mufti is favoring Maulana Saad, then you have to really ask your question as to where you stand. What grounds do you have to oppose all of these scholars and continue to follow or favor Maulana Saad or participate in activities affiliated or associated with Maulana Saad and disregard a body of Islamic scholars and institutions? Once again, you have to answer for that on the Day of Judgment. And let me end by telling you, once again, the sort of the structure of Tablighi Jamaat. So as I said, Maulana Ilyas rahimahullah ta'ala revived this work of Tablighi Jamaat. So he was the first de facto Amir. The second one was Maulana Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala. When he passes away, the Shura and Maulana Zakaria Shaykh al-Hadith was a strong member of that Shura, appointed the third Amir, Maulana Inamul Hasan. Maulana Inamul Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala appointed the World Shura on June 12, 1995 of 10 members, and they included a 29-year-old Maulana Saad because to appease the Mewati fractions, because that opposition was always there. This World Shura was expanded on November 16, 2015 because over a period of 20 years many of the original members had passed away. Everybody on the Shura endorsed this expansion except two individuals, Maulana Saad and Wasiful Islam. They did not sign this expansion, and shortly thereafter Maulana Saad took over Tablighi Jamaat, and this is where we stand today. When it comes to fitna, then the clear hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when everybody knows that we're supposed to fight the fitna physically or fight it with our words, or at least consider it bad within our heart, and that's the least level of one's faith, of one's iman. This is, we are not politicians. We are going to die and answer in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So being nice, being nice to people just for the sake of being nice is not what this Sharia commands us to do. And I was talking to a lot of brothers before I did this presentation in their locality, around the world, as to what happens and so on and so forth. This entire Shura and this expanded Shura here, the members have been usurped of their rights. They have been exiled. They have been cut off from the work that they've done. They're people who've steadfastly done the work of da'wah for decades, and they have been shut off from, managing their affairs and managing the affairs of da'wah as duly appointed by Maulana Saad, and a rift has been created, violence have been inflicted, the book of Tablighi Jamaat has been changed, the rules have been changed, and so on and so forth, and there are scholars' opinions on this matter. So if we have to side with the truth. We will die and we will stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have to testify that we are with the truth and with the guidance. And this is how this issue of Maulana Saad got here from 1965 until now. Please feel free to comment and set the record straight. If you think some facts that I've provided here are inaccurate, feel free to challenge it. But if you cannot challenge it and you continue to back this oppression against the Shura, then you will be held responsible in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.